Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Unbound, The Other Side of Quiet. This is season 3. This is the story of Brandon. At first, he seemed like everything I'd ever wanted. Someone who listened, he noticed me, he made me feel special. But sometimes the people who make us feel most chosen are also the ones who quietly take away our control. In today's episode, I'm going to explore how attention can turn into manipulation and how trust can be weaponized, and how an almost 14-year-old girl navigated a world where the line between love and control was completely impossible to see. This is chapter 5 in the book, Brandon. The second time Brandon spoke to me, I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. It was late August, just a few days after our first conversation at St. Clair Circle. I was out for a walk when I heard my name called from across the street. "Beth, hey, wait up!" He jogged over, slightly out of breath, wearing that same easy smile. But this time something was different. This time he seemed really focused on me, like he'd been looking for me specifically. "I was hoping I'd run into you," he said, falling into step beside me. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day." My brain basically short-circuited. He'd been thinking about me? About our conversation? "Oh," I said, trying to sound casual instead of completely overwhelmed. "Yeah, it was nice. You seemed different from most kids your age," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me feel like he was seeing something in me that no one else had noticed. "More mature, more interesting." I don't think anyone had ever called me interesting before. Weird, yes. Difficult, absolutely. But interesting? That was kind of a new one. We walked for another block, talking about nothing in particular. He asked about my favorite music, my favorite movies, if I knew what I wanted to do after high school. He listened carefully, and in a way I had never felt listened to before. I had always felt dismissed, but he seemed to like what I had to say. And then, as we reached my street, he asked the question that changed everything. "Are you allowed to date?" My heart stopped. Actually stopped. I think so," I stammered. "I mean, my parents have never really talked about it, but..." "Good," he said, and his smile got wider. "Because I'd really like to take you out sometime. If you want to, that is." If I wanted to? Was he kidding? This cute, confident older boy wanted to take me out? Me? The girl who'd spent the last 3 years being treated like a walking disease? "I'd like that," I said, probably too quickly, definitely too eagerly. "Great," he said. "It'll be our secret for now, though, right? Just until we figure out what this is." Our secret. Like we were in some romantic movie starring Molly Ringwald, where the love had to be hidden because it was too special for the outside world to understand. I walked the rest of the way home floating on air, again replaying every word of our conversation, already planning what I'd wear on our first date. But I'd just agreed to my own destruction. The next few weeks felt like a fairy tale. Brandon would find me around the neighborhood, always seeming surprised and delighted to run into me. We'd walk and talk for hours, and he'd tell me things that made me feel like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. He was touchy in a way that felt new and exciting, a hand on my arm when he was making a point, fingers brushing mine when we walked. Nothing inappropriate, just enough contact to make me feel like there was electricity between us, like we had this special connection that other people wouldn't understand. And I felt special. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen. He'd ask about my day, my classes, my friends. He remembered details from previous conversations. He'd bring up things I'd mentioned weeks earlier, proving he'd been listening, proving I mattered to him. But there were also moments, little things that didn't quite add up. Like when I mentioned talking to a guy from my math class and Brandon's entire demeanor shifted. "Brett," he said, and there was something sharp in his voice. "You two talk a lot?" Not really, I said quickly, sensing danger without understanding why. Just about homework stuff. Good, he said, his smile returning. I don't like the idea of other guys thinking they have a chance with you. He said it like it was romantic, like he was being protective, like his jealousy was proof of how much he cared about me. I felt flattered instead of alarmed, but at the same time, I knew that no other boys would be interested in the awkward fat girl anyway. When Mark from science class tried to talk to me a few days later, I found myself looking around nervously, wondering if Brandon might see us. When he asked if I wanted to study together during a spare in the cafeteria, I made an excuse and walked away. I didn't want Brandon to be upset. I didn't want to jeopardize whatever was happening between us. Without realizing it, I was already learning to manage his emotions instead of my own. By October, I was convinced we were together. Not officially. We hadn't had the talk or anything, but the way he looked at me, the way he touched me, the hours we spent together, it felt like a relationship. I started thinking of him as my boyfriend, even though I'd never said the words out loud. My friends noticed the change in me. I was happier, more confident. I had this secret that made me feel special, made me feel like I finally had something the other girls didn't. You're different lately, my new friend Shauna said one afternoon when we were lying on her trampoline. Good different. What's going on? I wanted to tell her so badly. I wanted to share this amazing thing that was happening to me, but Brandon had said it was our secret, and I didn't want to ruin it by talking about it too soon. Nothing really, I said, just feeling better about myself, I guess. Another friend, Tracy, not grade 6 Tracy, was more direct. Are you seeing someone? She asked during lunch one day. Why would you think that? I said, trying not to smile. Because you keep checking the clock and looking toward the doors like you're expecting someone. She wasn't wrong. I was always hoping to catch a glimpse of Brandon in the hallways, always wondering when I'd see him next. Maybe, I said, unable to keep the grin off my face. Who is it? She pressed. I can't say yet, I told her. It's complicated. And it was complicated. At least that's what I told myself. Brandon was older. He was in a higher grade. Our families didn't know each other. It made sense that we'd want to keep things quiet until we figured out what we were doing. What I didn't realize was that secrets weren't protecting our relationship. They were protecting him. It was early November when everything changed. We were in St. Clair Park, sitting on the swings in the growing cold and darkness. It had become our usual spot, private enough for conversation, public enough that it felt safe. Except that night, it didn't feel safe. Brandon had been different all evening, more intense, more focused, like he was building up to something. I've been thinking, he said, reaching over to take my hand, about us. My heart started racing. Was this it? Was he finally going to make it official? I think we're ready to take things to the next level, he continued, and his thumb was tracing circles on my palm in a way that made me nervous instead of excited. What do you mean? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew. You know what I mean, he said, and his voice was softer now, more persuasive. We care about each other. We trust each other. It's the next natural step. I felt my whole body tense up. I wasn't ready for that. I'd just turned 14. I'd never even been kissed properly, let alone by him, and the thought of having sex terrified me. I don't think I'm ready for that, I said quietly. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. When I finally looked up, his expression had completely changed. The warmth was gone, the smile was gone. In their place was something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. What do you mean you're not ready? He asked, and there was an edge to his voice that made my stomach clench. I'm not ready, I repeated, wishing I could take the words back just to make that look disappear from his face. So what was all this then? He said, standing up abruptly. What did you think we were doing? I felt tears prick at my eyes. This wasn't how this conversation was supposed to go. This wasn't how he was supposed to react. I thought we were getting to know each other, I said weakly. He laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. He was laughing at me. He made me feel stupid. Getting to know each other, he repeated. Right, so you were just playing games with me, leading me on? No, I said quickly. I wasn't leading you on. I just need more time. Time for what? He interrupted. To decide if you actually want to be with me? Because that's what this is about, isn't it? You're not sure about me. I was crying now, confused and scared and desperate to fix whatever I'd broken. I am sure about you, I said. Then prove it, he said simply. And that's when I learned the difference between thinking someone cared about you and discovering what they actually wanted. That's when I learned that everything I thought was happening between us was actually happening to me. That's when the real nightmare began. I didn't know the word gaslighting when I was 14, but I sure got a masterclass in it that night. By the time Brandon was done talking, I was convinced that I was the problem, that I'd misunderstood what we were doing, that I'd been selfish and unfair, that if I really cared about him, I'd want to show him. But even with all this persuasion, all his manipulation, I still couldn't bring myself to say yes. So he tried a different approach. You know, he said, his voice casual now, almost conversational. Remember what happened at that gas station by the mall? Crazy stuff. I knew what he was talking about. Everyone did. A customer had been murdered about a month earlier. Some guy just trying to get gas on his way home to his wife and 4 kids. The whole thing had been all over the news for days. The station attendant and his girlfriend had egged on some other guy to kill him. Then they'd stolen the victim's car and credit cards and driven to Toronto like it was some kind of a game. It was the kind of senseless violence that made everyone in town lock their doors a little tighter. Yeah, I said, not sure where he was going with this. The guys who did it go to our school, he said, watching my face carefully. They're friends of mine, actually. My blood went cold. Really? I managed. Really, he said. Good guys, actually. Just got caught up in something that went way too far. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I couldn't imagine how egging someone on to murder an innocent father was something you just got caught up in. But Brandon was talking like it was no big deal, like violence was just something that happened sometimes, something his friends were capable of, something he was capable of. The thing is, he continued, they're very loyal, very protective of their friends, and they don't like it when people hurt people they care about. He paused, letting that sink in. So if someone were to, say, try to cause problems for me, try to spread rumors or get me in trouble, well, they'd probably take that pretty personally. I was frozen, literally could not move. It didn't matter that arrests had been made. Not that you'd ever do anything like that, he said quickly, his smile returning, because you care about me, and because you're smart enough to know that some things are better kept between us. He stood up then, brushing off his jeans like we'd just had a normal conversation about homework or weekend plans. I should walk you home, he said. Your parents will be wondering where you are. I walked home with him in silence, my mind reeling. Was he threatening me? Or was I overreacting? He'd said his friends were the murderers, but maybe he was just trying to sound tough. Maybe he was just upset that I'd rejected him and he was saying things he didn't mean. But the fear that settled in my chest that night never really went away. And that's exactly what he'd been counting on. The next time I saw Brandon, he acted like nothing had happened. He was sweet again, attentive, apologetic without actually sincerely apologizing. I'm sorry about the other night, he said, taking my hand. I didn't mean to pressure you. I care about you so much sometimes I don't think straight. I wanted to believe him so badly. I wanted to go back to the way things had been before, when I felt special and chosen and safe. It's okay, I said, really flooding through me. I just want you to know, he continued, that I'll wait, however long it takes, because what we have is special. And just like that, I was back under his spell. He wasn't the scary person from the park. He was my boyfriend again, the one who cared about me, the one who thought I was worth waiting for. Except now there was always this undercurrent of fear, this knowledge that he was capable of being someone else entirely. This awareness that I was walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger whatever it was that had made him so cold and threatening. I started changing my behavior without even realizing it. I stopped talking to guys at school. I made excuses when friends wanted to hang out. I became hyper-aware of Brandon's moods, constantly scanning for signs that he might be getting upset. I thought I was being a good girlfriend. Really, I was learning to be a perfect victim. It was December, and I was drowning. The pressure to have sex hadn't gone away. It had just become more subtle, more persistent. Brandon would bring it up constantly, framing it as proof of my feelings for him, evidence of our commitment to each other. When I continued to refuse, other things started happening. A hard shove when no one was looking. A punch to the arm that he'd immediately follow with a laugh like it was just playful. Fingers that gripped my wrist just a little too tight, leaving marks I'd have to explain away. But it was never bad enough to call it violence, to my 14-year-old brain anyway. Never obvious enough to point to as abuse. Just enough to keep me scared, keep me compliant, keep me believing that if I could just figure out how to make him happy, everything would go back to normal. I started telling stories at school, weird, elaborate stories that made no sense. I had already told my sister, Sally and Kelly, I had a boyfriend. I actually said it was a guy from our school who lived on St. Clair Circle. I felt like if that was believed, even if word got out, because he was older than Brandon and wanted to be a cop, if Brandon found out then, maybe that part would scare him enough to back off. No such luck. They all knew better, especially my sister, but she didn't really question or confront me how I had hoped. I told my friend Shauna that my cousin from Ottawa was visiting and that he might transfer to our school. I described him in detail, tall, dark hair, really protective of me, kind of intimidating to other guys. No dice. I don't even have a cousin from Ottawa. I told my science teacher that I was worried about my sister's boyfriend, that he seemed dangerous, and I didn't know what to do about it. My sister didn't have a boyfriend. I told the guidance counselor that I'd been having nightmares about being followed home from school. None of it was true, but all of it was true. Kinda, sorta. I was desperately trying to tell someone what was happening without actually telling them. I was hoping that someone would see through the lies and ask the right questions. I was praying that an adult would recognize that a 14-year-old doesn't just start telling random, sometimes disturbing stories for no reason. But instead of seeing my behavior as a cry for help, people just thought I was weird. Attention-seeking, making things up for drama. The more elaborate my stories became, the less seriously people took them, and the more isolated I became. Let's travel backwards here for a second. Grade 9 brought some unexpected friendships into my life, right when I was starting to lose myself to Brandon's control. In photography class, I met Shauna, the girl I had previously mentioned. She had just moved from Kingston. New school, new city, no history here. She had this Ally Sheedy in the Breakfast Club vibe. Looked like she should be popular, dressed like she could run with the cool kids, but chose to be a loner instead. Or maybe she was a loner because, like me, she didn't quite fit anywhere. We gravitated towards each other the way outsiders do. Both of us on the edges of things, both of us carrying stuff we didn't talk about, both of us just trying to get through the day. I told her about Brandon, not the truth. I didn't know how to tell the truth yet, but the sanitized version. My older boyfriend who lived in the neighborhood, someone who cared about me, someone who made me feel special. She knew who he was. She had interacted with him before. She thought he was my friend. I let her believe that because the alternative was too complicated to explain. Shauna needed a friend, and I became that for her. And she became my friend too, in ways I desperately needed, even if I didn't fully realize it at the time. In that same period, I also met Paulette in computer class, or maybe it was typing class. I honestly can't remember which. What I do remember is that she was a grade 13 student who had absolutely no reason to be kind to a minor niner like me, but she was anyway. Maybe it was because she was a bigger girl too, and she understood what it felt like to move through high school in a body that people judged before you even opened your mouth. Maybe she just had a kind heart. Maybe she saw something in me that needed gentleness. Whatever the reason, her kindness stuck with me. In a world where I was learning to expect cruelty, where I was being systematically broken down by someone who claimed to love me, Paulette's simple, uncomplicated kindness felt like proof that good people still existed. During this time, something also shifted with Sally and my sister Jen. They never confronted me directly. No dramatic falling out, no big fight, but I could feel it. The way conversations would stop when I walked into a room, the looks they'd exchange, the distance that grew between us like a fog I couldn't quite see through but definitely felt. They started spending time together, and without me. I assumed they'd been talking about me, about my weird stories, about the lies I had been telling, about how I'd changed, about whatever was wrong with me that they'd finally figured out, or didn't. The betrayal felt enormous, even if I couldn't point to any specific moment or thing that they said. It felt like they bonded over my problems, like they were talking about me instead of to me, like I'd lost two of the people I thought I could trust. Looking back, I don't know if that's what was actually happening. Maybe they were genuinely worried and didn't know how to help me. Maybe they were trying to figure out what was going on. Maybe I was so deep in Brandon's manipulation that I was seeing rejection where there was actually concern. Or maybe they were teenage girls doing what teenage girls do, gossiping, judging, pulling away from someone who was acting weird and they didn't understand. All is forgiven now. I have absolutely no hard feelings, but at the time, it felt like another piece of my world crumbling away, leaving me more isolated and more dependent on Brandon than ever. By grade 10, Shauna was pregnant, 15 years old and carrying a baby, navigating the stairs and whispers of high school hallways while trying to finish her education. I watched her belly grow, watched kids mock her behind her back, watched teachers look at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. And I was there for her. As much as I could be while drowning in my own nightmare, I tried to be the friend she needed. She had the baby, married the guy, dropped out of school to become a full-time mother at 16. Later, she'd have another child, then twins. They're still married today. I don't know if she was happy. I don't know if marrying him was the right choice or the only choice she felt she had. I don't know what her life looked like behind closed doors. But I know she was brave. I know she kept her baby when a lot of people thought she shouldn't. I know she built a life out of a situation that most adults would struggle with, let alone a teenager. We drifted apart after she dropped out, the natural way friendships fade when your daily lives no longer intersect. But we check in occasionally as adults, the way people do when you shared something significant, even if you can't quite articulate what it was. What Shauna didn't know, what I couldn't tell her then, was that watching her navigate pregnancy and motherhood at 15 was searing something into my brain. Fear, judgment, shame. I was watching what happened to girls who got pregnant in high school, how they were talked about, how they were treated, how their entire futures got rewritten in an instant. And I was terrified that I was next, because Brandon was still pushing, still pressuring, still finding new ways to convince me that if I really loved him, I'd prove it. And I was running out of ways to say no. The worst part wasn't the fear or the confusion or even the physical intimidation. The worst part was that I still believed Brandon and I were in a relationship. Brandon had convinced me that this was what love looked like, that the jealousy was passion, that the pressure was proof of how much he wanted me, that the threats were just him being protective of what we had together. I thought I was choosing to stay with him. I thought I had some measure of control over what was happening. I had no idea that what I thought was a relationship was actually a carefully constructed psychological prison. I had no idea that everything I believed about us, about myself, about what was happening to me, was a lie he'd built to keep me trapped. I had no idea that the boy I thought loved me was systematically destroying every part of who I was. But I was about to find out just how far he was willing to go to keep me under his control. And I was about to meet someone who would show me what real love actually looked like, even if I was too broken to believe I deserved it. What's actually true? Predators don't start with violence. They start with attention, validation, and the exact type of love their target has been craving. What feels like being chosen is actually being hunted. What feels like special connection is actually calculated manipulation. Grooming works because it gives you something you genuinely need: attention, affection, feeling valued, while slowly isolating you from other sources of support. The relationship feels mutual because predators are experts at making you feel complicit in your own victimization. When you say yes to small boundary violations, when you keep secrets, when you make excuses for their behavior, it's not because you're weak or stupid. It's because they've systematically trained you to normalize abuse. The shame you feel isn't about what you did wrong. It's about what was done to you by someone who understood exactly how to exploit your basic human need for love and connection. What special relationship in your life involved secrecy, isolation, or gradually escalating boundary violations? What did your intuition tell you that you ignored because you wanted the relationship to be real? Permission slip. I'm allowed to trust my instincts about people and situations. I'm allowed to say no to anything that feels wrong, even if I can't explain why. I'm allowed to leave relationships that require me to ignore my own discomfort. I'm allowed to prioritize my safety over someone else's feelings. Your intuition isn't paranoia, it's protection. This week, listen to one gut feeling you've been ignoring. Trust your body's wisdom about people and situations, even when your mind wants to rationalize away the discomfort. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happening in this episode, because there is a lot beneath the surface. At 14, I didn't understand what was happening to me. Brandon seemed perfect at first. He was attentive and he remembered the stupid little things, and he made me feel like I mattered. And that's exactly how predators start. They give you what you've been craving, that affection and attention and that sense of being seen. Um, the feeling of being special, of being chosen, it's intoxicating for anybody. And when you're young and craving validation, it's easy to mistake that for genuine love. What I know now about predators, they don't start with violence. They start with attention, and they study you, and they learn exactly what you're hungry for, that feeling special stuff, the validation, the love, all that jazz. And then they become the person who provides exactly that. If someone seems too good to be true, if they're giving you everything you've been desperately craving, you got to trust that instinct that something feels off if it's there, because your gut knows things that your brain hasn't figured out yet. And any of that, it's not love, it's manipulation. And it doesn't start with violence, it starts with control. It starts with someone learning exactly how to make you feel dependent on them, and how to isolate you from the people who could support you, and how to make you question your own instincts. Isolation, it doesn't happen all at once either. It starts small. It's just a comment here or a look there, or a subtle suggestion that other people don't understand something or what you have together, whatever the case may be. Before you know it, you're making decisions based on someone else's comfort instead of your own needs, right? So if you find yourself changing your behavior or avoiding friendships or making excuses to keep someone from getting upset, that's not love. That's control. The first time I realized something was off, I didn't have the words for it. I just kind of felt this tension, the way that his smiles could turn cold if I didn't do what he wanted, and the way that his jealousy made me kind of second guess every interaction with other people, male and female. The little touches that seemed innocent, the attention that felt flattering, it was all carefully calculated. And when someone asks you to keep your relationship secret, what the hell are they protecting? If it's truly about privacy or timing, then that's one thing. But if you start to feel like you're hiding something shameful, like you can't talk to anyone about what's happening in your life, that's a red flag. Healthy relationships don't require you to disappear from your support system. I saw this in a friend who was in a relationship with someone else who, I knew vaguely from a past life. And she did this to him, isolated him. He was afraid to talk to me. Now I think y'all know who I'm talking about now. But anyway, it happened. It happens to adults. It happens to men. This is not exclusive to young people. It's not exclusive to children. People asking you to keep your relationship secret, if it's not about privacy or timing or anything like that, there's a problem there, like a huge problem. Anyway, this is, when manipulation reveals itself for what it really is. When you say no to something and suddenly the person who claimed to care about you becomes someone you don't recognize, when your boundaries become evidence that you don't really love them, when your comfort becomes less important than their wants. If someone ever makes you feel guilty for not being ready for something, or if they act like your boundaries are personal insults or something, or if they turn your no into some sort of a freaking character flaw, that person doesn't love you. They just want to control you. And threats don't always sound like threats either. Sometimes they come disguised as information, just casual conversation or friendly warnings. I'm not threatening you. I'm just letting you know what could happen. When, someone tells you about their capacity for violence, and when they make sure you know about their connections to dangerous people, when they even paint a picture of what happens to people who cross them, believe them. They're not bragging. They're establishing control. Abuse itself rarely looks like what you see in the movies. It's not constant violence and obvious threats. It's the good times that make you question whether the bad times really happened. Maybe it's the apologies that don't actually acknowledge what they're apologizing for. The way that you start changing yourself to avoid triggering their anger, until you're so busy managing their emotions that you forgot you're allowed to have your own damn emotions. What's really strange to me now in hindsight is that as recent as 25 years ago, even 20 years ago, um, I was stating that I was in an abusive relationship. He made me believe I was his girlfriend and he was my boyfriend. But we were never, ever in a relationship. I was never his girlfriend and he was never my boyfriend. See how fucked up that is? What he managed to convince me of, and I'm not just saying it because it turned sour or because it was bad, it was never good. I'm not bitter about it and saying we were never in a relationship because I'm a bitter Betty. I truly believed we were. Fortunately, I'm able now to see that and say that and to know that my first real love, my first true love was very good. But that's coming next chapter. Still, I want to take a moment here for anyone listening. If you've ever been in a situation where someone's love feels conditional, where your boundaries are challenged, or where you feel afraid of their reaction, that's a warning sign. It doesn't matter how charming or convincing they are. Feeling scared or controlled is never, ever normal. I see this happen now. Like I said earlier, it's not limited to young and naive people, and it's not limited to females. The person I talked about, not going to name names, but because, many of you are listening, know this person, who he is, and he was in a controlling and manipulative relationship. He became isolated and was mentally abused, sometimes verbally abused. And then the abuser turned it around and acted like they were the victim, In fact, I know that this person is still speaking to other people that way, claiming that they were a victim, when in reality, as an outsider, I was able to see what was happening and I saw who the true victim was. Back to my situation, though. One of the hardest things for me was, that I thought I was choosing to stay. I thought this was a relationship we were both building, but that sense of agency was just an illusion. Predators are experts at making you complicit and making you feel like it's your fault if things go wrong, right? That's why grooming works. That's why psychological manipulation is so damn effective. It makes you believe that your survival in the relationship depends on your behavior and your patience and your compliance. And this goes back to what I, had just finished saying about the person who was close to me, who's in this very situation with someone who on the surface appeared and sounded like a wonderful person. But so did Brandon. The cruelest part of psychological abuse is that it convinces you that you're choosing it, that you have agency in your own destruction. If you're reading this or hearing this and recognizing yourself, if you stayed in something that hurt you because you believed it was love, if you made excuses for someone's behavior because you thought that's what loyalty meant, if you lost yourself trying to make someone else happy, please know you weren't weak. You weren't stupid. You were being systematically manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit your basic human need for love and connection. The person who hurt you was an expert at making abuse look like affection. Your confusion wasn't a character flaw. It was evidence of how well they'd hidden the truth from you. Anyway, amidst all this, life goes on. Friends still exist and other stories still unfold. And that's part of what makes this period so complicated too. I had Shauna, my friend from photography class, who was dealing with her own challenges, pregnant at 15, navigating high school judgment, learning what motherhood meant at such a young age. And I was there for her as much as I could be, even while I was drowning in my own nightmare. Sometimes we support others while we're drowning ourselves. Sometimes we can be strong for someone else even when we can't be strong for ourselves. If you've ever been the friend who showed up for someone while secretly falling apart, who held space for someone else's pain while carrying your own, you know this particular kind of exhaustion. Your support of others during your own crisis isn't hypocrisy, it's survival. Sometimes helping someone else is the only thing that makes us feel like we still matter, like we still have something to offer the world. Supporting someone else while you're struggling yourself is a unique kind of exhaustion, but it's also a reminder that even in dark times, human connection persists, right? Kindness exists. People exist who show up even when the world feels unsafe. When someone starts telling strange stories, acting erratically, or dramatically changing their behavior, please don't dismiss it as attention seeking. consider that they might be drowning and trying to signal for help in the only way they know how. Sometimes the most desperate cries for help come disguised as lies, as stories as behavior that doesn't make sense on the surface. If a kid in your life is acting strange, if they're telling wild stories or making up elaborate scenarios, ask yourself, what are they really trying to tell me? Because in my case, I couldn't tell anybody what was happening, because if I did, I would be breaking Brandon's rules. I needed them to guess so that they could help me out of it. If they guessed it, then he couldn't hurt me because I didn't tell. They guessed. And it never happened. I guess this chapter of the story is about learning to recognize what real love isn't. It's about seeing how someone who claims to care about you can kind of take everything you know about yourself and twist it for their own control. It's about understanding the warning signs too, the subtle, insidious ways that abuse kind of creeps in before anyone else notices. So, that's it. The attention felt flattering, the secrecy that was demanded, the subtle threats disguised as casual conversations. Bad patterns there. I ignored that nagging gut feeling because it didn't make sense to me yet. That's what I did, and it cost me so much. Even though I was too young and too broken to see it at the time, I was about to meet someone who would show me what real love actually looked like. The cruelest part of psychological abuse is that it convinces you that you're choosing it, but if you stayed in something that hurt you because you believed it was love, if you made excuses for someone's behavior or lost yourself trying to make someone else happy, you weren't weak, you weren't stupid. You were being manipulated by someone who knew how to exploit you. That's it. Thanks for being here. Please make sure to follow me wherever you listen to me so when new episodes come out, you'll be notified. Remember that all episodes of Unbound are free if you want to support the production costs. All the information is in the show notes. Content will always be free, though. I say that at the end of every episode. Support and contact info in the show notes. If you join the Facebook group, sometimes we have further conversation on each episode there. Sometimes we have giveaways, other fun things mentioned in off-script episodes. Anyway, that's it. I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.